Today, we are bringing you a rapid fire breakdown of three massive stories impacting your wallet and the world. First, we're looking at the AI arms race, where underdog Anthropic is officially dethroning OpenAI as the go to tool for massive corporations. Then, we pivot to Washington, where Kevin Warsh has just been confirmed as the next Fed chair, which is going to directly impact your borrowing costs. Finally, we are unpacking the global explosion of weight loss drugs and why the multi-billion-dollar search for a physical shortcut is a stark reminder that true discipline is free. Uh, my name is Matthew White, alongside my co-host Nyamki Buchanan, and this is Road to Riches. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Let's get right into it. Only three stories today, but they are big ones. So, starting with the first story, we are covering how Anthropic has officially dethroned OpenAI as the go-to AI for large corporations. And this is coming on the face of obviously, a lot of people have chosen Claude over ChatGPT, which are those companies' respective LLMs, what they chose to call them. And I think I see every now and then, Kalshi has these betting odds about which AI is better, and Claude is far and away the best one. Number two, obviously, ChatGPT, and then number three, Gemini. But this story kind of goes over, and we can look at the first paragraph here. So we read that Anthropic is emerging as the presumptive front runner in the race for artificial intelligence supremacy, with faster growth and fundraising that could soon yield a higher valuation than rival OpenAI. So again, that is also referring to Anthropic's plan to go ahead and go public. They've been talking about going public for a while now. Currently, Anthropic is still a private company, and they're on pace right now to have a higher valuation than OpenAI, which is pretty great, especially considering that they did not get that government contract. What's weird is that Anthropic has kind of thrived since they didn't get that government contract. A lot of people, starting use a lot for a lot of people that deal with with the War Department that OpenAI had taken. A lot of people, there was rumors about how some safety checks were rolled back for the War Department, that maybe there was some security features that Anthropic insisted on that the War Department did not want uh, on Claude while they used it for their purposes. And whether those were true or not, that news still came out and were positive marketing for Anthropic and very negative for OpenAI. I think shortly afterwards, um, his name escapes me, but the CEO of OpenAI came out and actually posted on X that
It's Sam Altman, by the way.
there it is. It escapes my mind from time to time, but Sam Altman came out and posted on X that OpenAI had actually agreed to all of the same safety checks and ethical guidelines that Anthropic did. So the way he tried to frame it was the exact same contract that they agreed to, and uh, which got a lot of people wondering, like, yeah, but Anthropic was the one who was approached first. So if you agreed to the exact same thing, that doesn't make any sense. Somebody's lying here. And so, but anyway, that all that to say, it drove a lot of people away from ChatGPT and a lot of people to Claude. And anyway, back to the story. So, Anthropic is the newest LLM on the market. I think it is the successor of ChatGPT by, or rather, the youth of ChatGPT by um, probably somewhere around 2 years. It actually came out sometime in late 23, early 24, and ever since then, it's continued to get better and better and better. Opus 4.7 came out about a month ago, and it's been the preferred, and now it is the preferred LLM for corporations. And so we talk about AI taking over a little, not really taking, not necessarily taking over, but playing a larger and larger part in the professional world. Um, and so we talk about this in the context of, it's not just a toy anymore. You know, it's not help using AI to help you write your college essay or high school essay or what have you, like when ChatGPT came out. Now we're talking about it's coming in, it's actually being used in the professional world for that has real life consequences, and just what are the implications behind that. And so, what happens when something bad happens with AI? Say we suffer some kind of catastrophic supply chain failure in terms of getting the correct, for example, getting the correct server farms up to speed, or delivering the proper amount of electricity, or cooling, or whatever. What happens when something like that slows down, because so much of the corporate world now uh, depends on that. What is our contingency plan there? And so I'll pass that over to you with that thought, Nyamki, about what does this story mean to you, and with the facts being what they are, should we be worried about AI playing this large of a role now in corporations?
Honestly, I don't really think it's that much of a concern at this point in time. Obviously, it is to some degree a good thing, right? That AI across the board, right? These different AI companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, etc., are truly starting to get some legitimate revenues from their work. It's previously been one of the largest concerns in this space, right? Is that they've been selling their LLMs and these other models, or even providing them more or less free of charge to consumers, and the continued investment that these companies have put in has not paid off in any tangible way. That's really starting to change now. The article is showing that Anthropic is projecting $50 billion in annualized revenue. OpenAI somewhere around 24 billion, though how they calculate that is a little bit different, right? So we don't necessarily know what those true numbers are. But that said, you did mention as well how companies are starting to bring in these models to different areas in their operations. My bank actually uses Copilot for a lot of things. I won't necessarily say a lot of things, but it's the model, or the service that we as employees are directly allowed to use. They have a license for it. And they've actually made it a little bit specialized, right? So they fed it additional financial information. They have put, safety nets and barriers and things up to ensure that what we put into the system doesn't go out. So
Hmm.
we're able to drop in, financial statements, for example, and pull out a summary of things like that, or have the AI detect trends, Copilot detect trends. So across the board, we're seeing now true adoption in many different fields for many different AI models. Like I said, Copilot, OpenAI, Anthropic with Claude. I mean, to be completely honest with you, when Claude announced, I think it's Mystic, a few weeks ago, they said, it's too powerful to put out into the world. I kind of wish they did. I'd like to actually see the model, but that's neither here nor there. Um, but again, it this entire discussion for me comes back to the fact that now we are actually getting to a point where these companies are becoming profitable.
Right.
The article, I'll actually show it right here why it says these things are a little bit different. Right here it says OpenAI said in late March that its revenue had reached $2 billion a month, or $24 billion on an annualized basis. Though the figures aren't perfectly comparable to Anthropic, that is, because Anthropic counts sales through cloud partners as revenue, while OpenAI doesn't. That one statement is extremely important, not necessarily from a monetary standpoint, but because we're also seeing that the direct model interface is not the only way that these companies are monetizing their platforms. Let's take another example of a tool that we use at my bank. It's called IBIS World. So this is essentially a industry research tool, and they have their own inbuilt AI interface. They call it Phil, and I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet that this company did not completely build their Phil AI model. I'm pretty sure that at least one of these companies is the back end for it. And these are the additional use cases that we're seeing. Let's take another example that many of us have probably interacted with at some point. Definitely more recently than in the past, but again, I'm sure at some point we have. Whether you're using uh, maybe online banking or Amazon or something like that, all these companies have AI powered customer service interfaces. So if you have a problem with one of your Amazon packages or an item you got and you try to go into a chat, well, first you're going to have to interact with the AI model, and then they'll direct you to either call or get you a representative person, actual person representative, things like that. So we're seeing so many use cases for these models and for these different AI systems that now the companies are truly starting to come into their own. And as we even saw previously, they're starting to really tailor their offerings as well. Seeing as how OpenAI has recently gotten rid of Sora, which was their video generation tool. So they said, we're no longer going to keep dumping money into that. We're going to focus on what's actually bringing in revenues. And I think that that's something that's very important for all of these companies, that they are now truly focusing in on their niche a little bit, with Google services, Gemini and Netbook LM, things like that they do. We're seeing that side focus a little bit more on education tools and workspaces. We're seeing Copilot focus a lot more on integrations with Windows platforms and businesses and things like that. And of course, for a lot of companies, it's easy because they use Windows and Outlook and Word and Excel and things like this. And Copilot will then be an easy drop in. And Anthropic, as we're seeing it's great with calculations and things like that. So people are using that in Excel, for example. I think it's a good thing that now the AI industry is starting to become mature, is
Right.
essentially what I'm saying. And I think that's a great thing now and looking forward.
Yeah, definitely. As we start to see these companies actually start to monetize and profit off of these business models, and no pun intended, these LLM models. But you touched up on something that I kind of want to go a little more in depth, especially because this is a finance show. We want to try to explain to our younger audience a little bit of the nuances of business growth and why exactly these AI companies are acting the way that they are from a business standpoint. Um, and which meaning this situation remains the same no matter what industry. uh, it's just a fact of business. you went over a little bit how these companies are now becoming profitable and now actually beginning to pay their debts and perhaps scaling to their own, perhaps adjusting to their own size. Later on down in the article, we find that Anthropic has struggled with has struggled with its continued growth in users. It, I mean, uh, for example, we read that Anthropic has actually people using Claude tools jumped 3.8% in from March to April, and which is a big jump considering their already massive consumer base. And and as a Claude user, I have noticed, and a lot of other people have noticed that I've talked to who also use Claude, that Anthropic has had to throttle usages and throttle the use of tokens a lot, especially when you use higher output models like Opus instead of Sonnet, for example. And this is a consequence of Anthropic not necessarily being ready for the kind of massive growth that they have seen. And in terms of the larger lesson here is that in business, sometimes this catches you offhand. Sometimes your business does experience this large growth. And normally it's around 10 to 15% per year. In my experience, I've noticed that businesses that stay below a 9% growth each year are normally able to kind of manage that growth with not too much trouble. But companies that experience larger types of growth like that sort of have they have problems a little bit in managing it. Not necessarily because they don't want the business or anything like that. They're legitimately not equipped at that time because they were geared for 85% of that business. Now we're talking about them being geared for another 15% on top of what they were already taking care of. And this goes for restaurants, construction companies, uh, you know, even our industry, which is the banking industry. Um, and so that paragraph alone is not it's not necessarily an indictment of Anthropic's business model, but the underlying context here is sometimes miraculous growth hits you. And when it does, because remember, you may not experience that growth going forward. It may be 15%, and then you won't see another substantial growth for another 5 years, which can happen. So a lot of people, what they do when their business grows substantially is they say, "Oh my God, look, we're going to grow 15%, and then we're probably going to grow another 5% next year, or 7%, or another 5% the year after that." Well, you can't necessarily do that. In fact, dealing with a 15% growth, you may shrink by 3%. It's the next year. It's just the way of the world. Meaning that I've seen people do this a lot where they're not cautious with how much they invest. I see a country, or not a country, a company right now who experienced substantial growth 5 years ago, and they blew through all of their cash thinking that the growth was just going to keep coming and the good times were just going to roll. And now they're in severe financial trouble because they got ahead of their skis. They took advantage of the good times that they had instead of maybe putting some of that stuff back, expand a little bit, maybe. But it's an old banking adage: cash is king. Make sure that you have the liquidity to protect yourself against a poor performing market. Yes, that means that you may not be able to service massive growth, but you have to grow into your growth. You can't just once you get a little bit of growth, a little bit more money for your services, you all of a sudden expand like the growth is going to last forever. And that's sort of what Anthropic is doing as they continue to grow, because if they just expanded right away, nobody would experience these bottlenecks, or at least that they would be a lot less common. So I just wanted to point that out, just as a general business, just as a general business lesson, that you have to be aware of you have to be aware of your market, of your industry, and do not assume that the good times are just going to keep rolling, because majority of the time actually they are not, and sometimes they even get worse. So you have to be ready for that.
All right, moving on to our second story here. Um, Wall Street Journal again. Actually, all three of our stories are from the Journal today. But Kevin Warsh has been confirmed as the Fed chair in a 54 to 45 Senate vote. Now, for a lot of you who may have been keeping up with this at least a little bit, um, the big question is, well, what happens to the previous chair, Jerome Powell? At this point, he's basically said that although he is being replaced as the official chairman, he's not actually stepping down from his secondary position as a member of the FOMC. So he will continue to be relevant, though not necessarily the face of the Fed. Back to the story. We're seeing here the Senate confirmed Kevin Warsh as the Federal Reserve's 17th chair Wednesday in a largely party line vote that reflected how tensions with the White House may have dragged the Fed deeper into the political fray. Warsh, who was nominated for the post by President Trump in January, won confirmation 54 to 45, earning support from all Senate Republicans but just one Democrat, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. There was also one that didn't vote. Um, you know, this is to some degree not necessarily a massive political issue, in my opinion. Um, of course, the last few years, there has been hyperpolarization on both sides, no matter what, and this is just one other manifestation of that. But there has, of course, been a little bit of more politics going into this than has previously been stated. As any of us know, Trump has previously had issues with Jerome Powell not lowering interest rates according to what Trump wants, and therefore, again, the Republicans are pretty much going to go with what the true leader of the party says, who's the president in power, while the Democrats are generally going to stand against him. That said, John Fetterman is actually a strange case because there are rumors that he'll be leaving the Democrat Party to join the Republican Party. I don't know if that's true or not, and it ultimately doesn't truly matter for this decision. Just wanted to have that little bit of discussion right there. A little bit about Kevin Warsh, the new chair. It says Warsh, 56 years old, has been immersed in monetary policy debates for decades, frequently an outspoken critic of the Fed. A former Morgan Stanley investment banker, he became the youngest Fed governor in history at 35 when former President George W. Bush appointed him to the central bank's board in 2006. During the financial crisis that struck 2 years later, he played a key role tying up rescue deals that pulled Wall Street banks back from the brink. But by the time Warsh left the Fed in 2011, he had become a critic of its direction, concerned that the economy recovered. That as the economy recovered, excuse me, the Fed's ongoing efforts to support financial markets went too far. What this tells me, from kind of a more outside looking in stance, is that Kevin Warsh more than likely is going to attempt to push the Fed into more of a wait and see stance, right? Previously, Jerome Powell and others and other presidents of the Fed that are on the FOMC have wanted to take a little bit more of an active role to some degree, wanting to get ahead of certain things that may come up. And of course, the last year or so, particularly with the war in Iran, they have started to step away from from that idea and be a little bit more wait and see, as Kevin Warsh has been shown to be a favor of. Therefore, realistically, I don't think we're going to see much change with the actual management of the Fed. I think the decisions will continue to be fairly constant. We are in a position where, according to the last vote, I don't remember for sure, but I think it was three governors that did say that they actually dissented from the rule to have no change to interest rates. I think that Kevin Warsh himself is probably on board with maintaining things as they are for the foreseeable future. But we may, in the next month or two, over the next meeting, start to see a little bit more pushback on that wait and see stance. We may see some of the governors start to vote a little bit more in favor of lowering rates or to be more adamant about doing so. I believe that at this point, most markets have priced in uh, just one more, maybe even two more rate drops for the rest of the year. Of course, that's all heavily based on how things continue to shake out in Iran. But I think that overall, Kevin Warsh is probably going to be a pretty good chairman for the Federal Reserve moving forward. I think he's going to be focused a lot more on bank regulation and maintaining the integrity of our financial system rather than trying to directly intervene and change things left and right. What do you think about this, Matt?
Yes, I definitely agree, specifically with the last part that you said, which is he would be a little bit more focused on bank regulation. And the reason I say that is because he has been vocal about specifically President Trump's agenda, economic agenda, trying to maybe push a new era of productivity using artificial intelligence, and maybe the Fed could leverage that productivity to lower rates, and also maybe lower regulations coming from the FOMC, and also with language from the Fed, specifically some FOMC members and some governors of regional banks, we may see now that Mr. Warsh has been confirmed, we may now see that these regulations begin to be pulled back. Bank regulation has kind of been at the forefront of conversations regarding large banks and their roles in determining overall output in the country and everything like that. Specifically since 2008, we the FOMC originally put all of these restrictions on commercial banks because in using the collapse of the economy in 2008 as a cover for that. It's a hotly debated topic. Personally, I think that banks are heavily overregulated, specifically smaller institutions, but even the bigger ones. Anyone who has really looked into 2008 knows that it wasn't necessarily they had a part to play simply because they were told to start buying mortgages. But so the big banks had a part to play, but it wasn't even necessarily the big banks that had a hand in that as much as it was, for example, government institutions purchasing mortgages, which in this case uh, would be Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and uh, because of those purchases of mortgages, it simply incentivized the ball to keep rolling. It simply incentivized banks to keep making them, even though maybe borrowers couldn't afford them. But it was simply like, we keep buying them from you. It's profitable for you, so why do you care? And so you can look at banks and say, oh well, you took the bait, right, but you guys were the ones who offered it in the first place. And so it's a hotly debated topic. In this situation, I think that maybe we'll see a little bit of deregulation in the banking industry, especially because of especially because of the not just invention but continued improvement of AI. um, Before it took, specialists in the area, people who were masters in regulation, which, by the way, changes year to year. Regulations concerning commercial banking are constantly changing, and so too do these people have to continue to learn, continue to go to, for example, in the state of Oklahoma, we have the Oklahoma Banking Association, continue to go to OBA classes and things of that sort. But now we can simply give the regulation textbook to an AI and specialize it for that task because of the improvement of these LLMs, and say, okay, am I compliant? Am I not compliant? And why? And so, and also, we're getting to a point now where the even the Fed has admitted, okay, this is a little bit over the top. Maybe there are some regulations that even we're uncomfortable with because we think that they're simply uh, uh, overstepping the original bounds of the original intent of the regulations, which is to prevent another catastrophic meltdown of the economy. And I think that maybe Warsh can help out with that. He's certainly been an advocate of. Uh, he's certainly been an open market advocate, a free market advocate, a little bit, if you will. And maybe he will have a role to play in that. Time will tell. Uh, as far as rates are concerned, you know, maybe Warsh is that one more Fed chair to come in and say, all right, fine, if we get to that 2.4% that we were at back in March or February, then we're going to lower rates. And he's that one extra vote that they need. Um, Other than that, not much really to talk about in it, more. He's definitely the president he thinks he's a good pick. So we'll wait and see. Right. Right. Well, and then they're tainted by, of course, right now with the crisis in Iran, energy prices, and so that's a real cost that Americans have, yes, but it kind of taints the number a little bit. And again, why we don't cover those stories, as much as, like CNBC, they cover that story and they'll come right out and say 3.8%. Well, yeah, that's the number that grabs people's attention. That's the number that turns heads, but that's not necessarily the real number. I mean, because one of those factors is an extremely volatile factor. I mean, gas is coming down. As Where I live, gas is coming down. It's and it was going up, a couple days earlier. And so we're talking about a real volatile variable here that isn't talked about in the mainstream media. And so, again, just to aid your point, that's another reason why even the Fed doesn't go off of that CPI number. Yes. All right. Yes. Okay. So for our third story of the night, we come to the phenomenon of weight loss drugs, and this is something that is sort of near and dear to me. I am an avid gym goer. I love going to the gym. I am a non-competitive. I would call myself a non-competitive bodybuilder. I really really like to, I don't take any drugs or anything, of course, but uh, I that's what they keep telling me, and I'm like, no, I enjoy sleeping at night. But no, but for the but I say that in terms of, I try to watch what I eat, and work, try to sculpt my body through fitness and things like that. And so that's why I kind of chose this story. I thought it was a good opportunity to not only go over the facts here, but also give a little lesson, a little Matt's Corner lesson, um, uh, about life in general. So, reading from the title, America's weight loss drug boom is going global. So we read in the first two paragraphs here, the weight loss category is growing more competitive. We see pharmaceutical giants Eli Lilly um, is beginning to look pretty valuable to investors. Prices for weight loss drugs have been falling, and early scripts for Lilly's new pill, Foundeo, didn't suggest it was off to a rousing start in the US. That is why, leading up to last week's earnings, the stock fell sharply, a rare moment of investor doubt for a company that hit a $1 trillion market capitalization just last fall. And so, going over the rest of the story, we see that these weight loss drugs, they're actually very successful overseas, around the world. We're seeing a large increase in demand in not only the target market but other markets as well. Areas where the drugs aren't necessarily geared towards is what that means. They're not targeting these consumers, but they're taking them anyway. And so, I mean, just one fact that really stood out. Novo Nordisk, who is another very large pharmaceutical company, their international obesity drug sales grew 44% in Q1 of 2026 alone, first quarter. And then Eli Lilly's international sales for injectable Mounjaro hit 4.4 billion for Q1 2026, which is nearly four times what they did just 1 year earlier. So it's having more of the story. It's having a large impact, not just in the United States, but around the world. But specifically, it's growing a lot faster overseas than it is here. Now, huge caveat to this story, it's been extremely successful in the United States. I mean, I know several people who take these weight loss drugs, maybe not these specific drugs, but drugs like them. And of course, everybody knows. And in fact, it might be a meme now. It certainly is in Gen Z. But Ozempic, everybody knows Ozempic. Um, and at this point, somebody should just make a song about Ozempic, and it'll go to Billboard #1 or whatever. Um, I didn't even know that they had it. I think I heard the jingle once. It's actually kind of catchy, but I will not be taking the drug because of their jingle. But anyway, I wanted to bring up this story not just to say that, okay, these weight loss drugs are very popular, and here are the facts as to how popular they're becoming. I wanted to bring this up because, again, I'm a non-competitive, avid gym goer, bodybuilder. Nyamki, uh, you are also a gym goer yourself, trying to eat healthy yourself, just as I am, and things of that nature. Um, and I wanted to say that because these drugs, while they do have their purposes, there are people, with diabetes, for example. There are people who, they actually do have a medical reason to take them. But I would wager a majority of the people who take these weight loss drugs are taking them and simply because uh, they either can't or don't want to put in the work to actually lose weight themselves, on their own terms, drug free. And on a larger note, these drugs serve as a shortcut. Do they work? Absolutely. For a lot of people, they work very, very well. Somebody at my bank, that I work with, takes it. It's worked for her extremely well, but it's a shortcut. And it's not necessarily that there are things wrong with shortcuts, but in this case, you're talking about putting something in your body that I'm at the end of the day, it is a drug. It's not like, it's not like Gatorade or anything like that. You're either injecting yourself with it directly into your bloodstream, or you're taking a pill, or you have a medication plan or whatever. And in my opinion, there are, uh, some things are too good to be true, and in my opinion, here, this is a little bit too good to be true. I know a lot of people who take them. Um, I don't necessarily know the studies behind these drugs. The FDA has been known to approve things that perhaps didn't necessarily uh, pass repeatable clinical trials. I say repeatable because the FDA will say, "Oh, well, they passed clinical trials." Right, but were they according to the scientific method? And as we've seen exposed, in the past couple of years, a lot of these drugs and vaccines uh, were not done in repeatable clinical trials that followed the scientific method. All in all, you know, I would warn people against relying on, expensive short-term fixes to long-term problems. And in this case, it's not only a lesson in personal health, but in mental health and professional health. You relying on these short-term fixes oftentimes just do you great injustice, going on the looking at the long term. You take this shortcut, and okay, there are people who have liposuction. In fact, I have a cousin who had liposuction, and her rationale was, well, I just can't lose all of this weight. um, and it's really bothering me, so I'm going to go get lipo, and it's going to help me tremendously. Okay, well, she does it. Well, guess where she is again at this very moment? She's exactly where she started, and that's really my larger point in investing, and in physical health and mental health, in professional health. You are simply going to set yourself up for future failure because you have not learned, because it's all a learning process. You have to deal with the pains in order to be prepared for in order to be prepared for the future. It's just a fact of life. And so again, that's the larger lesson behind this, is that, you know short-term fixes, this short-term gratification obsession in our culture is unhealthy, and we've seen how unhealthy it is. Just, take social media, for example. It's had detrimental effects on our generation, on the generation after us, and even older generations that have gotten into social media themselves. I mean, we're looking at mental health crisis right now, and that's not good. That's not healthy. Um, but it's a short term fix for oh, we're bored. Well, or we there's nothing else to do, uh, we'll watch these clips on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok, and now we find ourselves in an education problem. We find ourselves with people who can't comprehend at their grade level, and in a financial sense, if you ever find yourself working for a company or owning a company or anything like that, uh, always remember that you have to be ready for the long haul. There are no shortcuts, and the shortcuts that do exist, oftentimes they're too good to be true. You always have to be wary about these things because people will take advantage of you. The world is a cruel place, and even if nobody does, uh, the market can sometimes be unforgiving for your lack of preparedness. So, you know, all of that being said, please leave with the reminder that short-term fixes sometimes are not a very good idea. It's always better to be prepared for the long term and do things yourself rather and build that discipline rather than rely on short-term fixes and without actually changing your process. Right. Sure. Right. Right. Right.